Hello there and welcome to this week's portrait painting demonstration. My name is Yupari. I hope you all are having a wonderful week. And in this portrait painting demonstration, we're going to look at a very classical, almost old master-like approach. Now I say almost because we can't really know exactly how the old masters worked. But we know that quite a few of them utilized underpaintings and then successive layers of color over top of monochromatic underpaintings. So rather than creating a transfer drawing with this one, we're going to be drawing directly onto the canvas with charcoal, just getting our simple shapes and simple design, and then we're going to go over top of that with pastel pencil, and then we're going to go over top of that with just two colors, titanium white and raw umber, to create a monochromatic underpainting. All right, I'm going to start off this painting in a very kind of traditional fashion. So I'm going to start off with just charcoal, and I'm going to do a preliminary drawing. And this is going to serve kind of the function of what a transfer drawing would be if I were to, say, complete a drawing on a separate sheet of paper. But for this one, I'm going to draw directly onto the canvas using charcoal. And if you want to know exactly what materials I'm using, you can go ahead and scroll down to the description box below and I'll have all of that information typed up and ready for you. So I'm starting off with the composition in mind. Now this is a portrait that I'm going to want to work on for a little more than one sitting. So I'm thinking of the overall design of the picture at this moment. So I'm thinking about this negative space here. Imagine this is the side of the hair, and I'm thinking of this negative space in relation to this negative space. So right now we just have the basic envelope of the portrait. So the basic envelope is just a few simple straight lines and angles that encompasses the entire portrait. So let's think about this distance from the back of the hair to the corner of the canvas. And I want this distance here to be a little bit smaller than this distance here. And I don't want the top of the head to be too close to the top of the canvas, but I also don't want the head to be centered either. So these are the compositional elements that I'm considering as I'm blocking in this very simple envelope. So here we have a little angle for the back of the hair, and then there's a little swoop that the hair is making in this direction, so we're putting that in there. And again, the idea is to use simple straight lines and angles. Just goes back in like that. All right, so now we're just about ready to start to put in some information for the inside shape. So we're kind of working outside in. So let's suppose that this is the hairline, and I'm trying not to be so aggressive on the canvas with my charcoal, just so it doesn't make such a kind of rough noise. And because I know I'm going to be painting over this, so I don't want too harsh of marks to work over top of. So now let's look at the position of the neck. So here we have the position of the neck, and now we have the bottom of the jaw. Now I'm thinking of the dress, so let's go ahead and put some information in for the dress. Again, thinking mostly about composition at this point, and that is the arrangement of the shapes. So here's one part of the dress, and let's move this a little bit. Here's another part. So I'm thinking that the center right here of the dress, I want it to be a little further to the right. Again, I don't want to center too much with my composition. And after doing that, I think I have to move this shape a little more. So this is the beauty of working in charcoal. You can easily wipe something off with a piece of paper towel. All right, so we have a very distinct relation here for the neck, the bottom of the chin, and the shoulder. So this, let's see here. So if this is the little distance between the bottom of the chin and the shoulder, let's just imagine how this shape is going to look. Let's just picture the shape for a second. So we're coming down here. Imagine this is like a road, like a windy road. We're going all the way down here, and then we're turning in this way. And then we have a little flux right there. A fluctuation in the lines. And now we're going actually more straight down. So we're imagining this whole shape and we're abstracting what we're looking at. Not really thinking about this is a chin, this is a neck, this is a shoulder. I'm really thinking about just shape at this point, and I'm trying to simplify each and every shape and just a few simple straight lines and angles. The game is how simple yet accurate can I create these shapes. Alright, so now that we have our composition mostly figured out, let's just make the shoulder go out a little more like that. So now that we have our general large shape composition figured out, let's get into some of the smaller shapes for the portrait. So let's go ahead and just make an axis here. And so this axis is going to be the axis for the eyebrows. And let's go ahead and do that over. So this comes at an angle like this, but not quite that severe. Very lightly, I'm just going to make that line there. Now we're going to have an axis for the eyes, coming right around here, somewhat like that. Now we're going to have a little indication mark here for the side of the eye socket, giving us the turn that the model is making. And let's not forget about the center line. Remember, the center line is what divides both sides of the face and gives us kind of the turn that the model is making relative to us. And so this turn is kind of like this. So it's 3/4, but closer to profile. Profile being the complete side view of the model's face. So the center line probably comes down to about there. And now let's look at the nose. Now I'm making all of these decisions by eye, just observing the visual information and using my mind to interpret it. So here's a little shape for the bottom of the nose. And now we're going to put in a little shape for the mouth. So these are accents. Accent marks that are going to kind of push me towards the direction of where the proportions are going to fit. And now I'm trying to get just a few simple straight lines and angles to establish the large structures of the eye sockets, the cheeks, the nose, and the structure encompassing the mouth. Don't want a completely finished outline at this point because we're going to go over this with paint. So I don't want to be too attached to the lines. But again, this is going to be a more traditional approach to creating a portrait painting. And that's because I'm going to be working on this painting for at least more than one sitting. So here we have the angle for the eyebrows. Now we're going to block in a simple shape for the eye. So this is the eye to the left of your screen. And then let's follow this angle down, and it's going to give us the eye to the right of your screen. And the eyes are starting off really simple, just little shapes, little tiny shapes fitting within these larger shapes. So again, here's a little shape for the corner of the eye. Notice how it's almost like a little triangle right now. The highest point of the eye is here, the lowest point is here. I'm not even worried about any of the little details yet. No detail, I don't want any detail. So here's the side of the eye socket. To the left of your screen, the eye to the left of your screen. And I'm thinking of the structure of the glabella at this point. The glabella is this little area right here. And it's fairly wide, so it's a little wider than I have. So let's move that over a little bit. And that's about it for that. Now I'm going to look at the relation between the eye sockets and the nose. So let's use a little vertical line. So drawing a vertical line here, we see that the nose fits a little to the right. That is the corner of the nose. So let's do that. That's going to fit right about there. And now how about the distance that the nose is making? So just by eye, I'm going to go ahead and make, well, first I'm going to use this vertical line to compare, and then I'm going to observe the model, but I'm not going to directly measure the model. So I'm just going to do this little vertical comparison just for myself. I'm going to try to do most of this by eye. So I see that just optically, this distance here from the hairline to the eyebrows should match up with the bottom of the nose optically. So that means that I'm going to have to move this line up a little bit. And again, this is why I say keep your shapes simple and easy to work with. Simple and easy. All right, so that distance, that proportion seems to be about right. Remember, proportion is just a relation of one thing to another. Now let's look at the distance from the bulb of the nose. So right here, so the distance from the bulb of the nose to the side of the face, just optically, this needs to come in. So this distance here needs to shrink. And this is how we're reasoning with the shapes, using straight lines and angles. Now remember, this whole shape here is a plane. This is the plane for the cheekbone, zygomatic region. Imagine the skull underneath of these shapes. You have the eye socket here, the nasal bone here, and the zygomatic bones. Again, that just means the cheekbones. So this comes in a little more, and then as a consequence, this is going to turn inwards like that, a little bit more. All right, now that we have our large shapes in place, I'm going to switch to a different drawing material. So I'm going to be using just a piece of burnt umber pastel pencil. And again, I'm going to provide a list for you in the description box below of all the materials that I'm using. So I'm going to be, I'm using I'm using a pastel pencil because it won't erase as easily as the charcoal would. The charcoal was very useful for the initial block-in, but now I'm going to want to make some more permanent marks. Then of course I'm going to go over with the oil paint. So here we have the eyebrow following down the bottom of the eye socket. We're going to have this little concavity right here. So this is the concavity of the eye. And now we're going to add a little more specificity for the eye. So let's look at the little iris. It's making a shape right about in here. We can even shade that in, that's okay. So the nice thing about the burnt umber pastel pencil, I mean, you could really use anything. You could use a graphite pencil if you want to, just something that doesn't wipe off. The nice thing about it is that it's kind of in the same color as a burnt umber drawing that I would do normally if I were working in alla prima. And remember, alla prima just means creating a painting in one sitting, which is certainly not what we're doing with this one. So it kind of resembles those colors of the burnt umber drawing brush. And let's even put some little indications here of the side of the eye socket. All right, so let's take a little bit out with the paper towel. Now let's go ahead and look at this shape very closely. So now the top of the eye would be right here. So this is kind of like the top of the roller coaster. Then it's going to angle down until we land onto the tear duct. Once we achieve the tear duct, we're going to get a little further down, and then we make our way down to the back side of the lower eyelid. Now let's compare to the other eye. Now optically, this distance, it looks all right, but I feel like this still needs to come out a little further. So now let's go ahead, lighten the lines a little bit. Now let's look at the other eye. So right now we have a little shape here for the nasal bone. And now we're going to place in the shape for the eye. Now using a horizontal mark, I see that the tear duct of this eye is a little bit higher on a horizontal than this eye. And again, that's just because the eyes are at an angle like that. And so here we have the iris. I don't want too much detail, even with this little tiny, even with these tiny little adjustments. Don't want too much detail. This angle comes out a little bit like that. And again, back to the eyebrows. So the eyebrows are going to make a very distinctive shape, and they're going to help us achieve the likeness of the model a little more quickly. Again, I'm not putting too much pressure onto the canvas. I don't want to cut right into the canvas. So this comes in like that. Then we have the forehead angling a little more like this. Now then, switching back to the side of the face, this angle actually needs to come in a little more like that. And again, still using simple straight lines and angles to block all of this in. Now I'm going to take a look at the contour of the face a little more. So this comes out a little more like that, giving us this very distinctive shape. Now let's go ahead and place in this mark here. And at the same time, we can also draw in the little shape here for the cast shadow of the nose. Remember, the light, observe the light is coming in this direction, so we're going to have a little cast shadow here at approximately that angle. All right, so now we're going to put a little shape there for the little corner of the nostril that we're seeing here. And now we have the root of the nose, and we're going to even see a little bit. I know it might be kind of hard to see, but we have a little bit of the other side of the nose showing right here. And again, let's go ahead and double check that the eyebrows to the nose roughly equals the hairline to the eyebrows. So hairline to eyebrows should roughly equal eyebrows to bottom of the nose, and it does, so we're good. All right, so now with the mouth, I'm thinking of the philtrum. Now the philtrum is this little shape here, this little teardrop shape. And so I might actually have to move the mouth up a little bit. So if this is the shape of the philtrum, now for the mouth, I'm thinking of this vertical distance here, comes down here. Top of the mouth is here, giving us a smaller philtrum because we had it a little bit too big earlier. Just a little line here for the side of the mouth kind of matches up on a vertical with the corner of the cast shadow of the nose and the bottom of the mouth. And that's about it. I don't want any more information. You can even count them. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines is giving me the placement of the mouth. Don't want much more than that. Here we have the side of the face. Now the chin. The chin is going to, the distance from the root of the nose to the top of the lips is a little bit larger than that of the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. So what we had originally was fine. It's just now that we're going over it with the pastel pencil. A little shape for the chin. So now we're going to just go ahead and go over the rest of that with the charcoal pencil. Or sorry, with the pastel pencil. Again, just going to go over the rest of this with the pastel pencil. Alright, now that we covered the rest of the charcoal with the pastel pencil, we now have our linear block in. So now what we have here is just titanium white and raw umber mixed up with a palette knife in a value scale consisting of just 6 values. And I'm going to take from these values and construct the underpainting. So the first thing to consider is going to be the structure of the face, and we're going to think about planes. Alright, so a plane change is precisely this. So it is just a large area of value. Now, planes that are angling further away from the light source, such as this plane here, will become darker. Planes that are angling closer to the light source will become lighter. You can also think about it as the planes that are most perpendicular to the light source, such as these planes, will be receiving the most light. Think about rain falling down and hitting the pavement straight on. So that would be this instance. And think about rain hitting something that's on an angle, it's somewhat like this. And then when we're in shadow, we're going to be receiving none of the light. So then we'll move into these values. So let's consider again the plane. So this is the plane of the glabella, and this is the plane that is most perpendicular to the light source. Even though I can't see the light source, I know just conceptually that this plane change will be receiving that value. So now we're going to use a different brush, a larger brush, and we're just going to fill in the rest of this. And since we're going to be layering this painting, let's consider the principle of the fat over lean. So that means, all that means is that you're going to be using thinner and thinner applications of paint as you continue to develop your painting. So that is the first layer. So this layer that I'm applying, I'm not going to use any medium. I'm just dry brushing it. Notice how this is just straight paint. So no medium at all. And the reason I like to use raw umber and sometimes burnt umber for this instance is that it's a very fast drying color. So this will in fact be dry in probably 2 days or so. So now with that larger brush, we covered the rest of that plane. Switching to a different brush here, we're going to observe now the side of the forehead. So this plane right here is going to be receiving a darker tone, and that's just because of the hair. Just the hair meeting the side of the forehead. Alright, so let's go into our lightest light. So another thing that we're going to want to do with the underpainting is to blast the lights. So in most instances, I would be kind of careful not to use straight white, but in this instance, I'm going to do that. I'm going to make these planes much lighter and brighter in the light so that as I apply more layers onto the painting, I can have kind of a stained glass effect. Imagine this is like pretty much just a sunlight going through, and as we apply more layers over top of this, as we'll see later on, we'll create kind of a stained glass effect. So now this is turning away from the light, the side of the eye socket. And so since this is turning away from the light, it's going to be, as a consequence, darker. But at the same time, this plane change is also going to give us the concavity of the eye socket. And of course, as we move further towards the glabella, that is this region here, this area is going to be lighter. And I'm using a little size 2 round brush to do this because I like using round brushes for basically the small shapes of value. And that's because a round brush to me sometimes it tricks my mind into thinking that I'm using pencil, just pencil and paper. And that is because drawing itself is really the foundation of traditional art or traditional painting. So this shape is going to be a little bit darker here. And then we approach the eyebrow. The eyebrow is going to be darker. And as we move towards the higher region here of the eye socket, it's going to be receiving quite a bit of light. But it's not going to be too bright. And it's going to transition towards the eye just like this. And notice how very quickly we can create the illusion of form by just applying a few simple values. Remember, I'm just taking directly from the palette, and I only have 6 values on my palette that I'm using. So this is going to get a little bit lighter here. So I'm going to actually push that in a little more. And you may be wondering why I started the drawing with charcoal and then switched to pastel as opposed to doing a burnt umber drawing. And that's just because it's easier for me to work with the charcoal, to work with dry media, as opposed to doing the burnt umber drawing that you usually see me do. It allows me to have a little more control, and sometimes I don't want that. Sometimes I want the paint to just flow. But with this painting, I really wanted to take the time with these simple shapes, and that is because I'm, again, going to apply at least more than one layer. So now we're at the side of the tear duct here, and this plane is going to be receiving more light. Now notice how this is starting to create that volume in there. So again, as we work our way out of the concavity of the eye socket, we're going to be getting lighter and lighter. So as we approach this plane here, we're going to be receiving even more light. And then as we work our way around, we're going to be receiving less light. So again, I'm just going back and forth with the pre-mixed values on my palette. It helps make the process a little bit quicker to pre-mix your values. And it also helps you keep track of your shapes or your values. So I see that I still want this to be a little bit lighter. And again, I'm in danger of making it too light in relation to the this highlight region here. So kind of working back and forth between my values. And I really want to create the volume of the eye socket before I place in any small shapes for the eyes themselves. I really want to get these forms to look as three-dimensional as I can possibly get them. Alright, so let's start to block in the values for the eyes. So we'll start off with this one. So we're starting off with the second to the lightest value. And that's going to be the value for the sclera. I'm actually going to go one down. So this is the third to the lightest. And we're just getting that value in there. So remember, the sclera is the white of the eye. But again, the white of the eye, as I usually say, isn't white. So that's why we're not using straight white for that. Now let's work the other side. So I'm using the third from the lightest light. And I'm actually going to put this shape in first. So I'm seeing just a little tiny glimpse there of the other eye. Or sorry, the other eye. The other side of the sclera. So I'm just seeing a little tiny glimpse of that, and I might even take that out later. But for now, I'm just going in and blocking in this value. And if you're wondering of the tone of the canvas, I just toned it with burnt umber oil paint about a week or two ago. I like working on I like working on dry oil paint. Alright, so now we're going to go and put in the dark of the eye, just a little shape right here. So this is the corner of the side of the eye, and we're going to go even darker, our second to the darkest dark up here. Actually, let's just use the darkest dark. The darkest dark is, again, just straight raw umber, giving us the dark values for the side of the eye. And I'm just cleaning off the brush once in a while with paper towel. Again, no medium. It's going to be a little darker here as it turns into the eye. Now then, we're going to do the same thing to the other side. So just the raw umber here. Very predominant dark shape over here. And another thing I should note about using raw umber. So raw umber is, it's not as dark as burnt umber usually, depending on the brands, of course. And raw umber is not as dark as ivory black. So once this dries, I have a whole nother range of value that I have access to. So using raw umber actually helps me compress my value range. Alright, so now I'm going to use the third to the darkest tone on my palette to start to block in the pupil. Now what we do to one side, we want to do to the other side. Again, third to the darkest value. Remember, I have a 6 value scale pre-mixed on my palette, and I'm just taking directly from that. Alright, so now with the raw umber, we have the pupil. So here we have the pupil of the eye. somewhere about there. Pupil of the eye somewhere about here on the other side. And now with just the titanium white, we're going to put in the highlight. Little highlight here. Notice how very quickly, with just a few little value changes, we're already starting to get the structures look like the eyes. So now there's a very predominant dark shape down here for the lower eyelid. So let's paint that in there. And again, I'm not using any medium. And it's going to get a little lighter over here, but not quite that light. Just a little lighter on the side there. Again, this is a very classical approach to portrait painting. A little bit darker over there. There's a very distinct edge here. So this needs to be a little sharper. I'm sharpening that edge with just a little bit of a lighter value and more pressure. Try to get that edge to read. Just a little more raw umber there. Alright, so now we're going to work our way down. So let's start off with a pretty dark shape, so the dark for the nostril. So let's start with the second to the darkest, and then the darkest, so that there's a little transition into the darkest dark. Alright, now let's go ahead and put in, say, the third from the darkest, right about here, for the root of the nose. And now the cast shadow is going to be somewhere in between these two. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to use my fan brush first to try to eliminate some glare. I'm going to go ahead and start off with the darker dark, right about here, for the cast shadow. And I'm always thinking about the drawing. So again, I'm thinking of this plumb line. So vertical line sometimes is referred to as a plumb line from the corner of the tear duct to the cast shadow of the nose. So that appears to be fine, but again, I just have to go ahead and double check that. So let's go ahead and start to put in this little transition of value. And let's put in this little lighter plane. Lighter plane about here. I should have switched brushes to do that. So let's go ahead and switch to this one. I'm going to try to keep a light brush and a dark brush, just so I don't have to keep cleaning the brushes too often. Alright, so there's very distinct light shape there, so let's use this one. The light on the bulb of the nose is right about there. And this light isn't quite as bright as this light, so I have to be cautious of that. So switching, let's use this. Make it a little bit darker. Let's move this all the way up here now. Here's our light shape. And again, it's all right if the values are lighter than I would want them to be if I were, say, using color. And that is because I'm trying to make the underpainting a little bit brighter. All right, so let's use the lightest light right here. So there's going to be a little bit of light right there, and that's going to be the highlight. Remember, that's going to be the area that's most perpendicular to the light source on this shape of the nose. A little plane change here. And there's just a little bit of light right here. And then it's going to be a little darker up here. So lighter here, darker here. I'm just comparing the tone of each shape. And then, of course, we have the dark of the side plane of the nose, making a little angle there. And I said that I would keep a light and a dark brush, but I'm just going to keep using this one. So again, a little darker over here. This plane actually comes out quite a bit, so let's consider that. Thinking of the angle of the nose here, I feel like there's something missing here. And it could be that this needs to come down a bit more. Not sure. Again, let's think about this, as I mentioned in a previous video, as a visual puzzle. Think about it as a visual puzzle. I'm kind of combining these two values on the painting for this shape here. Then of course it's going to be lighter around here. Now we can see some very definitive plane changes here. 1, 2, 3, 4. The more plane changes you can put in, the more volume you can add to your painting. And that's why we're sticking with monochrome first. But I don't want the highlights to jump out too much. Right now the highlights are jumping out a bit more than I would want them to. So I just have to be aware of that. It's going to be a little darker around here. As these planes angle away from the light. Even darker over here. I'm going to use the fan brush just to try to eliminate some glare. Let's go ahead and observe this plane. Oh, it's definitely lighter. Let's use this one. Somewhat about like that. Nice and simple. Now one little shape that is constantly a challenge for most of us, certainly for me, is this plane. So the boundary between the side of the nose and the cheek here. And it's a very slight, I'm going to say it again, very slight edge. This is not a sharp edge. So I'm going to go ahead and just make it very blurry at first. Just like this, just softening the edge a lot. Then I'm going to go back in with the lighter light and redefine that little boundary. Alright, moving on down, let's go ahead and work our way towards the mouth. So first of all, let's think about the distance from the root of the nose to the top middle portion of the lip, of the upper lip. And again, this shape right here is also known as the philtrum. So let's think about the length of the philtrum. So again, the philtrum is going to be right about here, this type of length. Now let's think about the structure that contains the mouth, known as the orbicularis oris. That's just a fancy name to say the structure that encompasses the mouth. It's also the muscle, little muscle right here. So again, a light right about here. And then as we move around the side, this is also referred to as the muzzle, whatever you want to call it. As we move around the side, it's going to get a little bit darker, but it's going to get a little brighter over here. And you can see how we're starting to kind of create the outer boundary of the mouth itself. A little bit darker over here. Perhaps not that dark. So let's go a little lighter on the value scale. And again, I'm just going back and forth between the values on my palette. Then it's going to get even darker over here, but not too dark. Now for the side of the mouth, this area here, there's going to be a very predominant light plane there. And then it's going to be not as bright around the side. And then of course, this plane here is going to be darker, but not that dark. So let's go ahead and just unify all of this. There we go. Now we're starting to get the top of the structure for the mouth. Now let's take a look at the side over here, and I'm thinking about just the shape at the moment. This comes down. A little bit like that. Working our way down. So I see that this probably needs to be a little, this distance here needs to be a little smaller than I had originally drawn it out, and that's okay. Now something kind of interesting, we're going to be seeing a little glimpse of the teeth, a little glimpse there. Just a little glimpse. Normally I would probably edit that out, but I'm feeling a little courageous right now. So we're applying a Brave brush and just putting that dark shape in there. Just a little dark shape right there. Let's also make a little vertical gesture and relate this shape vertically to this corner of the nostril. Then while we have this dark shape, let's put in the side of the mouth. Just a simple little dark shape for that. There we go. And let's go ahead and put in the chin. A little shape here for the bottom of the chin. And again, I'm utilizing the tone of the canvas for certain areas. You can definitely see how I'm using it for the mouth. That's why it helps to tone the canvas once in a while. So it's definitely going to be lighter here. There's going to be a nice little transition here. So this shape is going to connect the side of the face to the chin. There we go, very simple there. And another thing I should mention, if anything is wrong, and I'm sure something's going to be wrong with the drawing, as we're working with the underpainting, we can always reassess the drawing in the next layer. And again, that's a very laid back, it's a very relaxing way of working, as opposed to an alla prima. Now, I've done a few alla primas in my past videos, and I really enjoy alla prima. And if you don't know what alla prima just means basically the opposite of this. It's working with large masses of color and creating the portrait painting in basically an hour or so, or however many hours you want to work it, but it's basically working wet on wet. And with this, we're going to be layering. So I consider this a much easier way to approach portrait painting and a much more laid back. Whereas, say, alla prima, it's a little more difficult to correct the drawing, but at the same time, sometimes it can be more fun because you're going through the process much more quickly and it's much more energetic. This approach is much more laid back. So here we're going to have an angle of plane right here. See this little W shape here? So this is going to give us the bottom of the orbicularis oris. And there's going to be a little value change here, because this plane is angling away from the light, and then this plane here is coming closer to the light. And there's going to be a very definitive side plane here for the chin. Very elegant little side plane here. And then, of course, it's going to get lighter and lighter as we approach the top plane of the chin. So again, this shape here is going to be pretty dark, but not too dark. Not using too much paint here. I'm kind of whispering the paint onto the surface. And let's throw in a little highlight here. Using the second to the lightest light. We have a little glimpse of light there. And let's not get too carried away, but there is a little glimpse of light right there that I wasn't fully describing. Let's just modulate that little edge there. Alright, so now let's go ahead and just fill in the rest of the masses of the hair. Sorry, the rest of the mass for the hair. Remember, mass just means a large area of value. So I'm just going to fill in the rest of this now. Alright, now that we painted in the rest of the mass for the hair, let's go ahead and work our way down to this region of the painting. So let's go ahead and get a lighter value, yet still pretty dark. Now we have the side of the neck. So this is the muscle for the neck known as the sternocleidomastoid. Let's go ahead and just try and get this edge back, the boundary between the hair and the neck. It still needs to come out a little further. So let's push that out a little bit. And again, reassess this edge. Just trying to get the side of the sternocleidomastoid. Just trying to push this edge in a little bit. Seems about right. Now let's just soften the edge. Alright, so now let's go ahead with the third to the darkest value and go ahead and put in the rest of the shadow shape here. And this is the cast shadow on the side of the shoulder. This comes out a bit like this. And then we have the muscle for the neck on the other side. Sternocleidomastoid coming down right about here. And then of course we have the shape for the clavicles. So let's go ahead one lighter up here. Let's just mix these two values right about here. So now we have a plane that's angling away from the light, but not quite as much as this plane. Just make the brush stroke in a diagonal fashion just to eliminate glare a little bit. Going back into this dark shape here. Now I'm really starting to get a lot of glare, and that's because I'm using more paint now in this section. So without too many plane changes, let's just go ahead and put in the light for the neck. So here we're in the the suprasternal notch, this little region right here, and it's receiving more light right about here. And it's going to be less bright up here. Let's go ahead and fill in the rest of the shape now. Comes up right about there. And let's just use the tone of the canvas to help us out with that transitioning value. Now again, using this same tone, let's go ahead and put in the light here. So this is the clavicle. So that is the collarbone, if you want to call it that. Angling right in like this. Nice and elegant little curve there. Now we have the other clavicle showing through here just a little bit, so just a little bit of light there for that. And then a big old plane right here. And right about here, there's going to be a section of the shoulder that's turning away from the light, creating a boundary right there. There's also going to be a little cast shadow here in this direction. Alright, so now we can go ahead and fill in the rest of the light mass. Let's go ahead and get a lot of paint right here. Quite a bit of paint here. And again, not using any medium, just dry brushing it. Now notice how we're starting to get the form to read a little bit. Not completely, but somewhat, starting to look like a shoulder. Let's go ahead and adjust this angle a little bit. Now there's even more light right here. A little light facing plane, excuse me. Let's add even more light there. And then there's going to be another plane change right about here. It's not going to be as... So this plane is going to be facing the light a little less, so it's not going to be as bright as this plane. And I really have to squint my eyes to see these little plane changes. But let's go ahead and just unify the rest of it. Very simple. Then maybe punch up the light a little bit more right around here. Even more white. Now for the dress, going to go ahead and use this value here, and we're just going to put in a dark shape for that. Just a dark shape for the dress for now. Let's go ahead and look at the outside shape here. So this is coming up a little bit like this, going down, going back up. Kind of like the hills and valleys of a little mountain here. Goes in a little bit like that. Let's just try to eliminate some glare there. And this goes down. And now we have much more of the dress. We're just filling in this little flat plane. Just filling in the plane. I'm going to go ahead and sharpen this edge here because it's pretty sharp. I'm actually going to go ahead and apply just a few little value changes here for the mouth. And I'm going to cover a little more of the tone of the canvas. After taking a short little break and coming back, I noticed that having this a different color, it seemed alright at first, but I think I'd rather just have all of this uniform. So, and what I mean is that just a different coloration for the mouth was just starting to bother me a little bit. So, just going to go ahead and fill it in. I'm using the fourth darkest tone, or you could think of it as the third to the darkest value. Remember, I have 6 values pre-mixed on my palette. Still trying to make the edges rather soft. Let's use the second to the darkest tone. Now let's switch to the darkest dark. It's a little bit more definition there. And again, it was just kind of starting to stick out to me that I was leaving a lot of the mouth untouched. Just soften a little bit with the fan brush. Add a little more light there. Let's just go ahead and reinforce that dark shape right here. Very simple. And while we're at it, there's a little beauty mark right over here. So let's go ahead and put in that shape. Just a little speck. It's about there. Add a little more light. And even more light. Don't want it to jump out too much. So I'm going to go ahead and soften it just a little bit, just so it's barely noticeable. Even a little less. That's about it. And with that, we now have the underpainting. And so I will see you next time when we apply some layers of color. I hope that this video helps you out. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next one.